Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vita Silva, the Museum Project Coordinator for the African American Museum and Library. And today we have an outstanding program for you with a very special guest. But before we introduce you to our special guest, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this institution. We are a research institution for African American history and culture. And we are so thankful. We're actually celebrating 20 years. We opened in February the 21st, 2002. So this year we celebrate our 20th anniversary. And of course, we have Mr. Dante King to help us celebrate by bringing him on as our special guest author. The African American Museum and Library, as I said, opened its doors on February the 21st, 2002. And once we did that, we never looked back. We kept moving forward, and we have reached that milestone for 20 years, and we continue to move forward. We now have 4 departments here. We have our reference library, which has over 16,000 books on African American history and culture. We have our seed lending library. All seeds are free, and for our public, the community can come in and get seeds for free, and hopefully they will go and plant them in small containers and large containers and bring some seeds back. That's why we call it the seed lending library. Our next department is the archives department. We have over 160 collections such as Ron Dellums when he was in Congress for 23 years. Congresswoman Barbara Lee's collection is here. We share her collection with Mills College because she is a graduate of Mills College. We also have Henry Delton Williams, the legendary Motown designer. His collection of original designs that he created for such stars like Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Diana Ross and the Supremes, the Frida Payne, the Jackson 5, and of course, Michael Jackson. So here we are preserving our history and culture. Yes, it's been a challenge, but we continue to beat all those challenges and continue to bring to the community the best of the best in African American history and culture. Our 4th department is the museum gallery right now. Of course, we're hosting our temporary exhibit, which is We Also Served African Americans in the Military. This exhibit actually opened up in December, and by popular demand, it has been extended. So if you haven't seen it, please come by and see it because it probably will be here for just another month. Also upstairs, our permanent exhibition, which is Visions Toward Tomorrow, the history of Oakland, beginning with the 1800s. If you've never been here before, I invite you to come in and visit the beautiful city of Oakland. And then, of course, stop by and see us here. There's touch screens, artifacts. We are a state-of-the-art museum, so you have a lot of audio and visuals that you can participate in and view and listen to individuals who, or some born and raised in Oakland, while others migrated to Oakland from other states and countries. So with that in mind, we'd like to thank you for spending the afternoon with us. And we do have an amazing program for you with no other than Mr. Dante King. Dante, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi,
Thank you,
Dante.
Vita.
How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm really fine. You know, you and I have been talking for quite some time, and finally we reached this moment where we actually are doing this.
Yes.
Before we go really into the meat of the book, I like to, this is my segment I call Up Close and Personal. I want to know a little bit about Dante. Dante, when he's not writing this amazing book, and what do you do? What relaxes Dante?
That's a good question. So I started or restarted within the last year a workout regimen that I've been pretty consistent with and keeping up with. I do that to energize myself, to clear my mind, to really try and balance myself out mentally and emotionally. The last several years have been rough in terms of some personal conflicts and challenges that I've experienced, of course, along with writing the book. But yeah, I do a lot of reading. I do a lot
Of
of,
course, of course,
yeah.
of course. Now I understand you're sort of like a native of San Francisco and a native of Oakland.
Yeah.
Explain that.
So I was born in San Francisco. My mother was also born in San Francisco. Her parents migrated there from the South, from Texas, actually, in the middle of the 20th century. So in roughly the 40s, the 1940s. And so they settled there. My grandfather worked in San Francisco. My grandmother also did as well. And so they raised their family. And then when my mom had me, I was born at Mount Zion Hospital. And in the late 70s, my mother and father bought a house in Oakland and they moved over there. And, you know, when my mom tells the story, she shares that when they went to purchase the home, really the only homes, Oakland had changed by that time and was in the process of like really dramatic change. And so I grew up in the traditionally redlined neighborhood, if you will, which was previously Italian, Portuguese, and by the 70s, it was predominantly Black. And so my mom could really only afford over there, which is why she moved out of San Francisco.
I see. I see. Now, I also know that your book has won us quite a few awards. Can you share some of that with us? I know I just shared because people need to know this book has really been pretty much gone viral. So tell us about the awards this book has won.
Thank you for that. The book has won a Book Fest award, which is like a national award through this organization called the Book Fest organization. And it won first place for nonfiction history. It's currently entered into two other awards. It hasn't won either of those just yet, but it is leading in one of them. And then it's about to be entered into the National Book Award, which is a huge organization.
Yes.
And so it's currently, that application is being worked on by my publishing company. And so to your point though, it is selling pretty good. It's selling really good actually within the first several months, in the first 2 months, actually 2 to 3 months.
Yes.
The book sold over 1,000 copies, and typically, independent authors can expect that book sales will be in the ballpark of roughly 250 to 300 by that time. So I'm very grateful, and I'm very grateful to have the platforms and the opportunities that I have in terms of the work that I've done with organizations who were familiar with my work prior to me writing the book. And now to have this body of work, it just further substantiates and legitimizes the work in a format that is widely accessible.
Yes. Well, we're proud of you and your book. We really are. And I've been following your book, and you're right, it is very successful. And so congratulations on those awards. Okay, before I turn it over to you, you know that AAMLO is celebrating their 20th anniversary this year in 2022. So I do remember that you gave me a call several weeks ago, and you said, Vita, I just want to have a tour, and I have a guest, and we just want to a really major tour. So I sort of hooked you up with my library assistant, Marco Frazier, who is an expert with coordinating tours and giving tours. So tell us a little bit about how you felt when you walked in this building, you met Marco, and then the tour.
Yeah. Well, first, I want to thank you. Personally, I want to thank Marco for yielding his time and insights to Steve and I when we were there, as well as Bamadele Agbasebe Dimerson, who is the chief curator of the museum. And I also I'm going to drop this link in the chat. It's the donate page to the library, to the museum and library. If everyone could go on there and just like donate $20 to celebrate and commemorate the 20th year anniversary, that would be phenomenal.
Yes.
But I felt a sense of deep emotion because, as I mentioned, I'm a product of Oakland. I grew up there, and to see a lot of the pictures and the experiences that Black people were enduring in the city of Oakland, which is for some reason not thought of as connected to, the rest of the world and or what was going on during the Jim Crow period, right? But I was overcome with emotion in terms of learning about the hospital that was open for Black clinicians and nurses because they couldn't work at Highland Hospital. No Blacks were allowed to work there. So this Black doctor came along and opened a facility so that he could teach Black clinicians, yes, about healthcare. And, seeing the picture of the people who were protesting on East 14th, I'm sorry, not on East 14th, on Broadway and 14th Street, mm-hmm, right where the Walgreens used to be. And they were protesting the fact that Walgreens was not, or Woolworths, one of them, I think it was Walgreens, but I'm not sure, or Woolworths. But they were protesting the fact that Woolworths or Walgreens was not allowing Black people to sit at their counters in the South, in some cases beyond, And I think to understand the depths of anti-Blackness and how this culture has been built and designed psychologically and programmatically on the exploitation and denigration of Black people, we really have to examine these cultural facets or components to fully understand the ways in which Black people are dealt with today and the ways in which we deal with each other, the ways that we are responding to each other in any given moment, and across the board, not just by white people predominantly, because white people created this and have perpetuated this orientation. I want to be very clear about that. But there are also gatekeepers of whiteness, and any one of us we all fall into that. All of us fall into it, and we can be actively working against our community, and if as Black people we can, and others who are not necessarily part of the Black community, and they're not part of the white community, but they are gatekeepers of white supremacy, as some Black people are as well. We can be actively working against the masses of Black people. And I think it's important to really go back, in which is what I strive and try to do in my book, but to dig up perspectives of people who have been saying this, and also give very demonstrable examples of what this has looked like, both past and present.
That's right. And that leads us to the 400-year Holocaust. That leads us, perfect intro, okay? So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Dante. Thank you for sharing some of your personal life with us. And now it is all you.
Thank you, Vita. So I first want to say thank you to everyone who is here today. And as Vita mentioned, you all are taking time to spend your afternoon to be here with me and to explore some of the information that I'm going to share with you. It would be great if you could all come on the screen for those of you who can. Would love to see your bright and shiny faces. Marcus Books is kind of my bookstore of choice. Blanche Richardson, who's the owner of Marcus Books, which is the oldest Black bookstore in the country. You know, she is wonderful. She's become like an aunt to me, and she's been working with me pretty rigorously in selling my book and supporting my work, and even just being a personal confidant. So if you haven't purchased the book already, I'm going to put the link in the chat for you to go to Marcus Books. And even if you have purchased the book, you know, I say to people, for those of you who can and have, you know, more disposable income, if you want to purchase a copy for others, so that you can read it with others, and or just so that they can have it, and particularly Black people. If Black people can, if you can purchase a book for Black people that you know, who may not be able to access it, that would be wonderful. So I'm gonna also put some handles, my social media handles. Actually, they're like Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, because what I have also done personally is I've donated books to schools. I've donated them to prisons. I've donated over 200 books so far. And so if you want to Cash App me, PayPal, to help me in terms of the I don't want to say losses that I'm taking, but to help support the giveaways, I would more than welcome it. I also just very quickly want to say thank you to my assistant, Jayantra Henderson. She is amazing. She does more for me than I could ever articulate in words. I would not be here without her. And also to my publicist, Courtney Lewis, who I actually just hired, and who is working very diligently to heighten the word, if you will, or the promotional effort around my book. Special thanks to Angela Thomas, my sister and friend. I saw you on here. Angela literally showed up at AAMLO the same day that I was going to give books there. She was so excited about the book, and she's like, I'm gonna get them to host you over there. And I also want to say thank you to Steve.
Hey, Angela.
Yep. I also want to give a special thanks to Steve Costa and Kate Levinson. Steve also had the same idea, and so I was only there because Steve had told me that I should go to AAMLO and just, you know, introduce myself to you all and find out how we could collaborate. And so I was like, oh, okay, great.
Thank you,
so thank
Steve.
you. Yes. So thank you, Steve and Kate. Alexis Cobbins, Marcel Walker, Chantel Johnson, Rochelle Rogers R, my godmother.
Yes.
These individuals are so important to me. They really provide me consistently with a lot of spiritual support. And I'm just very thankful. And thank you to all my friends and family members and just people who have supported the work that I've done so far and who are also now endeavoring to support the book. Last but not least, I always have to say thank you to my mother, Deborah King Cooper. If it were not for you, Mom, and I see you on, your nurturing, your love, your affection, guidance, belief, coaching, confidence throughout the years, throughout my entire life, your friendship, I would not be able to do this. I wouldn't even be alive still today. And I just want you to know today and always, I love you more than anything on this earth. You are the most important being to me. You are my religion. I have a in-person lecture that will be held at the San Francisco Main Library on May 11th. So if you all want to come, it's a lecture and book signing. So if you purchased the book and you want it signed, you can come and join me, but I'll also be giving another lecture and presenting there. And then the other thing I'll share before I get into some of the content of the book is that I also teach courses at UCSF. And so there's a course that is currently offered there that if you would like a longer experience in a longer period of time to immerse yourself and become more endowed with knowledge and more perspective, in addition to what's referenced in the book and what I'm going to share with you here, you can go and sign up for these courses. And I would encourage you, if you work for institutions who have professional development dollars and you get like an annual stipend for training, use it. The course is offered to physicians and attorneys. So if you are a physician, you get continuing medical education credit, more than 16 hours. And if you are an attorney in California, it's been certified through the state bar as well. So you can also receive 16 hours of credit. But what I also did is I included this year a rate for community members, which is half the rate that physicians would pay, to make it more economical and accessible for members of the community. So it would only be $300 for both days. And it's the course is 2 days and it's roughly 9 hours each day, okay? If you have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat and I'll try to answer them. And so I'm going to move on. I'm going to share some slides, but I want to, I'll share the slides first, okay? So remember, really quickly, go to Marcus Books and purchase the book. And then this is the information, since this is being recorded, this is the information for the UCSF Continuing Medical Education Office. And you can contact them if you want to sign up. All right. I want to recognize and raise up Dr. Barbara Page, who was the professor and chair of ethnic studies at Cal State University East Bay when I was there. For those of you who have some insights about my background, I majored in African American studies in my undergraduate work, and then education for my master's. And in the doctoral work that I have completed, that's more so in the realm of what my book is about. And so I also want to reference the works of people and the life experiences of people like Harriet Jacobs, Maria Stewart, who were all during the period of the 19th century, working fervently to amplify the experiences that Black women were having and the type of exploitation, mistreatment, and abuse that Black women were suffering during that period. I want to, my apologies, go back to this, recognize, I'll be pulling from this book, Race, Class, and Gender, recently passed away. She was very pivotal in terms of shaping my understanding too around the intersectionality and the ways in which Black women have been mistreated and treated in ways that are the most degrading, in a sense, aligned with the experiences of Black men in many ways, but also different in some ways. Dr. Jennifer Morgan, who's a professor of social and cultural analysis and history at New York University. Dr. Joy DeGruy, who's the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And then also Darlene Clark-Hine, who was a contributor to this collaboration, African American Women Speak Out, on Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas. So I'm going to start with a quick quote. So we look at, and this is from Cheryl Harris's paper entitled Whiteness as Property. One of the things she says in this paper, and this I quote this in my book as well, she says, moreover, as it emerged, the concept of whiteness was premised on white supremacy rather than mere difference. White was defined and constructed in ways that increased its value by reinforcing its exclusivity. Indeed, just as whiteness as a property embraced the right to exclude, whiteness as a theoretical construct evolved for the purpose of racial exclusion. Thus, the concept of whiteness is built on both exclusion and racial subjugation. So I want you to like breathe that in and think about this and consider it as I move on. So within the creation of white identity, which really emerges here in the American in the North American continent as a legitimate racial construct, that happens in the 17th century. And there are laws that I can show you. I won't share them here today, but that actually demonstrate the transition from Europeans being identified in the legal context as Christians, which was a term that was used in an ethno-religious fashion to identify European ethnics against predominantly non-European ethnics and some other European ethnics as well, who weren't necessarily considered clean, if you will. But she says, inherent within white identity is the need to subjugate. It's not just about having exclusive rights and or privilege per se. It is inherent within the construct, within the existence of white people and white culture. There's a need to not only feel superior to, but to dominate and to do things to actively subjugate. One of the things that Dr. Amos Wilson says, and he was a psychologist and an author and professor as well. He says, I keep trying to warn Black people, and I warn you again and again, your security does not reside in civil rights laws. A law is merely writing on books, and writing does not protect people. The law is only as strong as those who enforce it. And you've got the law written by your enemy and enforced by your enemy, which means that when the enemy decides to stop enforcing it, it's over for you. Or the enemy can decide to rewrite it. And so I want you to think about what we are experiencing right now and what we are seeing in terms of certain state legislatures and communities in certain states who are rushing to ban books. They're passing legislation to ban books to ensure certain curriculum or things are not included and or taught in primary education. You've got voter suppression laws. You've got laws that people are rushing through state legislatures to prohibit people from protesting if they don't have a permit, and if they are caught protesting and not having a permit that has been issued by the local municipality or city government, then they are subject to not to violating laws that would prohibit them in the future from being able to vote, as well as being able to rent apartments or get housing, right? So I want you to think about that. So I want to give a trigger warning, as I did previously, because I'm going to touch on a very touchy subject here. Some of you have heard me present on this, but I'm going to try and shed more light around it. This says, raping a Black woman was not a crime for the majority of this nation's history. First, the rape of a Black woman was simply not criminalized. And even when there was an argument that a statute was race neutral as to victimization, prosecutorial inaction and court holdings made clear the lack of recourse for Black women who were raped. In fact, a white defendant could argue that his indictment ought to be dismissed for failing to state the victim was white. So my work in the curriculum that I teach and both in the book looks at the construction of anti-Blackness and the construction of whiteness and what it means to, what it meant or became to mean to be white, what it became to mean to be Black, based on how the laws were structured to shape and create conditions, rights and privileges that shape communal attitudes in this nation around these concerning these racial identities. So I speak about the rape of Black Bessie, who was an enslaved woman that belonged to Thomas Key, who was previously born in, I believe, Angola in or around the 1610 through the 1611, and somewhere in that era. She was the mother of Elizabeth Key Grinstead, right? Elizabeth Key Grinstead, and I want to emphasize that Black Bessie belonged to Thomas Key. So Thomas Key, in essence, raped Black Bessie in order for Elizabeth, and then Elizabeth was born, right? So Elizabeth was a mulatto woman who sued for her freedom in 1655. The reason that she sued is because at this particular time, Thomas Key, who was an Englishman who owned her mother, was considered a free man. And the law at that time under English common law stipulated such that if one was Christian, they would be free. It was illegal to enslave Christians, right? Also, English Europeans were free, considered free. They could not be enslaved at this particular period. So she sued for her freedom. Before Thomas Key's death in 1636, he had indentured Elizabeth to Humphrey Higginson, and Humphrey Higginson was supposed to release her from her indenture once she turned age 15, roughly. He actually returned to Europe, so he sold her indenture to the Mottram plantation, and so she ended up belonging to John Mottram. Because John Mottram died in 1650, well, let me say this, because John Mottram didn't honor the indenture in 1645, in or around 1645, 1646, when she was supposed to be freed, she ended up remaining an indentured or bond servant, if you will, under contract, which in essence, they were prolonging it to ensure she was remaining enslaved. But because her father was free, she sued on those particular grounds. The heirs of his estate, the heirs of the Mottram estate, his children, presumably, did not want to release her from the contract. And so she actually ended up being in a relationship with someone by the name of William Grinstead, who later became her common law husband. And he was an Englishman, somewhat of a lawyer apprentice. He acted as her attorney. And because he knew the law, they were able to sue for her freedom. So I want you to think about this, how in the creation of the white legal structure, this Black woman at this time, her entire existence and the state of her her future reality rested in the hands of white men who were controlling her destiny, okay? There were witnesses who came to her defense. They supported her case. They testified that Thomas Key was indeed her father. That was well known because of a case that had happened in Blunt Point during the time that she was born, and the court actually held him accountable. So the most persuasive evidence came from an 80-year-old former servant of John Mottram, who testified that it was commonly known that Thomas Key had been fined by the court in Blunt Point for getting his Negro woman with child, so Black Bessie. He was fined because of that, and that child was Elizabeth. Pay attention to this. Thomas Key was not fined for the rape of Black Bessie. He was only fined for intermingling and having a child, reproducing a child with a Negro. So although Thomas Key took responsibility for Elizabeth, he was made to, right? So think about the volatility involved here with the domination that is occurring concerning Black women. And this is just one example, but it says the Virginia General Assembly resolved that by the common law, the child of a woman, slave, begot by a freeman, ought to be free. So they decided in her favor. But here's the deal. When she went to court the first time, actually, let me go back. So it says, one decision allowed Elizabeth her freedom on account of her father's freedom. So that was the lower court. But then when the Mottram plantation appealed the decision, the higher court denied her liberty because they said her mother was Black, and she looked Black. She was mixed Black. So the court system superseded the actual law at the time. They didn't care about the law. They cared about the fact that her mother was enslaved and that she also looked Black, okay? So they ended up releasing her, but there's turmoil here. So you've got, and I'm gonna ask all of you this, who are on today, what would you do if you found out, if you were mulatto during this period and you found out that someone who had a Black mother, which you also have, as well as a European ethnic father, or in particularly an English father, or someone other that's Christian, that they had sued for their freedom and they actually won. And I want you to write in the chat what you would do at this particular time, finding out that Elizabeth had won. What action would you take? How might you proceed? And I want you to think about that and write an answer in the chat. Okay. While you're doing that, okay, someone says go to court. It's time to go to court, right? So you have many people who follow that track. They're like, oh my goodness, this is great. You know, we now can get recourse by going through the court, right? So, but the court, they go in 1662, they changed the law. And what they say is, whereas some doubts have arisen whether children died by any Englishman upon a Negro woman should be slave or free, be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. And that is any Christian. Now we're talking about non-European, non-English European ethnics. It has an ethno-religious connotation. Africans, Jewish people, Mohammedans who are here at this period, they are not identified as Christian, okay? So they say any Christian, and that if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she so offending shall pay double the fines imposed by the former act. So now, based on a white legal system that is working to close loopholes to ensure that Black people cannot become free ever, they're creating legislation and or rulings that make it impossible. Does that make sense? And so with this ruling, it now does not matter whether one is born to an English father or another European dad. They're automatically enslaved because with this law, they transitioned lineage to that of the mother based on your condition follows the mother's identity. And so what this means in essence, some of the byproducts of this is that white men can now rape Black women freely and there's no proof or evidence because these children cannot gain recourse by identifying the white paternal parent as their parent at all. You can look at that law and understand, I encourage you to look at the law and understand that in this particular law, it actually facilitated the rape of Black women. And now, because there is no moral or legal accountability, rape then becomes a legal and cultural and moral practice. Breathe that in. Does that make sense? Okay. One of the things that I appreciate about Theodore Allen's book, The Invention of the White Race, he says others living in the colony at the time were English. They had been English when they left England, and naturally, they and their Virginia-born children were English. They were not white, and that's true for Scots-Irish people. That's true for Dutch, Portuguese people who were there as well. These are European ethnics. And within a law that occurs in 1681, which actually situates all of those European ethnics together as white, they're legally recognized as white. And it's a law that is concerning marriage between, or outlawing marriage between white men and women and Negro men and women. And I believe Indians are mentioned. So Theodore Allen says in his book, white identity had to be carefully taught, and it would be another 60 years before the word white would appear as a synonym for European American. And what he's talking about is the period between 1619, when you see the first Africans, or it's noted that the first Africans under English rule, who become dominated, if you will, under English rule, appear here in the Americas. So he's saying before the term white comes into play, all of these laws that are being enacted, that are being enforced, are shaping the cultural behavior and the cultural aesthetic of what white America becomes, of what the American identity then becomes. And so what does this mean in relationship to what they are learning about Black people in terms of how one treats Black people? It's also shaping the Negro identity and the Black identity. What is it meaning to be Black? And so I want you to consider both of those questions as I share some additional examples with you. So this is Maryland, and this is 1664. Be it enacted by the Right Honorable, the Lord Proprietary, by the advice and consent of the upper and lower house of this present General Assembly, that all Negroes or other slaves already within the province, and all Negroes and other slaves to be hereafter imported into the province, shall serve durante vita, hard labor for life. Okay, so we're making Black people slaves, and particularly this law goes on to really specify that they are talking about Black men, in essence. This is very crucial in understanding what is noted. It's very crucial to understand what's noted here, because what they are saying is that all Negroes and other slaves already here, situated here, and all Negroes who come from abroad and other slaves shall serve durante vita. They shall be slaves for life, right? But this is not true so if a Negro is free, if a Black person is free and they come from Haiti, they're imported from another country, when they get to Maryland, they're automatically going to be enslaved. But if you are free and you are, let's say, Cambodian or Japanese, if you will, that's not the same. You're not going to be enslaved. The association that's being made here, or the formation and grounding that's being established, is the Black identity that's rooted in criminality. And I think using the word slave undermines the fact that Black people were imported into prison labor camps and that they were in bondage against their will. That's called imprisonment. And so Black people by default become criminals. This law goes on to say, and all children born of any Negro or other slave shall be slaves as their fathers were for the term of their lives. And for as much as diverse freeborn English women, forgetful of their condition, of their free condition, and to the disgrace of our nation, marry Negro slaves, by which also diverse suits may arise touching the issue of such women, and a great damage befalls the masters of such Negroes, for prevention whereof, for deterring such freeborn women from such shameful matches, be it further enacted by the authority, advice, and consent aforesaid, that whatsoever freeborn woman shall marry any slave from and after the last day of this present assembly shall serve the master of such slave during the life of her husband. And all the children of such freeborn women so married shall be slaves as their fathers were. And be it further enacted that all the issues of English or other freeborn women that have already married Negroes shall serve the masters of their parents till they be 30 years of age and no longer. So in essence, what this law is doing is criminalizing the existence of Black people, making it off limits. It's also controlling through a white, patriarchal, dominant frame the sexuality of Black men, of white women. White men can dominate and do anything they want to any women whatsoever, but Black men cannot affiliate and or engage themselves with white women. So it's, even when you think of white supremacy, I think one of the things that gets missed a lot, and there are authors who have written on this, but really exploring the sexuality, how our sexuality as human beings, all of us, has been controlled by white people. For example, the LGBTQ, I identify as gay and queer. The LGBTQ identity is a white cultural, political development or invention, if you will. It's been a political invention, if that makes sense. And it benefits the white community in terms of their political standing in ways that it does not benefit Black people who identify as LGBTQ. And I can have a whole other talk on that as a Black, gay, and queer person. So here are some additional examples of that begin to be passed during this period. Some of them I note in my book. There's a case, a pretty famous case of an African man named Fernando who sued for his freedom in Virginia on the grounds that he was actually Christian. He came from England, and he produced documentation in Portuguese that stated he had been baptized, so it was legitimate. They actually dismissed this case because they said, well, you're Black, you're Negro, and that's not the way this is working here. Because again, if one is Christian, then they can't be enslaved because during this period, it is against the law. So in 1667, you see this act the same year that declares baptism of slaves. It encourages the baptism of slaves into Christianity, but the law particularly states that it does not exempt them from bondage. So anyone, if you're having a hard time seeing this, I'm going to share it on this screen. It says, whereas some doubts have arisen, where the children that are slaves by birth, by virtue of their baptism, should be made free, it is enacted and declared by this Grand Assembly and the authority thereof that the conferring of baptism doth not alter the condition of the person as to his bondage or freedom, that diverse masters freed from this doubt may more carefully endeavor the propagation of Christianity by permitting children, those slaves or chose of greater growth, is capable to be admitted to that sacrament. So what they did in essence here, they made it very convenient for enslaved people as well as Indians, who this law is particularly aimed at, to be baptized into the Christian orientation and to also maintain their status as slaves. You've got the Casual Killing Act in 1669, whereas the only law enforced for the punishment of refractory servants resisting their master, mistress, or overseer cannot be inflicted upon Negroes, nor the obstinacy, the stubbornness of many of them be suppressed by other than violent means. So because Black people who are fighting back against being forcibly traded, stolen, and or abducted, who are being put to work against their will, who are being flogged when they don't do everything that is being commanded of them, who are fighting back because they are either experiencing abuse and violence, whether it be in this picture down below, you see them tied to a post here, and another person who looks like another slave who's being ordered to chastise them, to whip them for any circumstance whatsoever. These individuals are fighting against being raped against their will. They're fighting against seeing and witnessing their children be raped, other family members, their mothers be raped, their fathers be brutalized, murdered in many cases, their sons being murdered. Because they're fighting against this and they're exhibiting stubbornness, and many of them can't be suppressed by anything other than violent means, be it enacted and declared by this Grand Assembly that if any slave resists his master, or other by his master's order correcting him, and by the extremity of the correction should happen to die, that his death shall not be accounted a felony, but the master or that other person appointed by the master to punish him be acquitted from molestation, since it cannot be presumed that premeditated malice, which alone makes murder a felony, should induce any man to destroy his own estate. So this law sanctions that you can murder if you happen to be chastising a Black person and they get out of hand, or you suspect that they're getting out of hand, or you substantiate by your word that they were resisting or getting out of hand, that you can kill them, you can kill Black people and be acquitted. So I want you to think about these laws as educative tools. This is an educative process. It is shaping the cultural identities, the cultural behaviors, the ways in which people relate together during this period, and it's shaping the identity and the placement of white people and Black people in this experience. And this is not just about white privilege. So I'll just share a few more examples. This is an act of 1680, preventing Negro insurrections, because now as Black people, more of them are being imported here, they're starting to organize and really cause trouble. And they're they're going around and they're killing white people because they realize there's no safety or protection anywhere. So in this law, they say, whereas the frequent meeting of considerable numbers of Negro slaves under pretense of feasts and burials is judged of dangerous consequence, for prevention whereof for the future, be it enacted by the King's most excellent majesty, by and with the consent of the General Assembly, and it is hereby enacted by the authority aforesaid, that from and after the publication of this law, it shall not be lawful for any Negro or other slave to carry or arm himself with any club, staff, gun, sword, or any other weapon of defense or offense, nor to go or depart from his master's ground without a certificate from his master, mistress, or overseer, and such permission not to be granted but upon particular and necessary occasions. Every Negro or slave so offending, not having a certificate as aforesaid, shall be sent to the next constable, who is hereby enjoined and required to give the said Negro 20 lashes on his bare back, well laid on, and so sent home to his said master, mistress, or overseer. And it is further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that if any Negro or other slave shall presume or lift up his hand in opposition against any Christian, shall for every such offense, upon due proof made thereof by the oath, just by the word of the white person that's saying that this happened, before a magistrate, have and receive 30 lashes on his bare back, well laid on, if you don't have that certificate. And notice, this is not saying slave. This is saying every Negro or slave. And it is hereby further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that if any Negro or other slave shall absent himself, that means run away, from his master's service and lie hid and lurking in obscure places, if they are committing injury to the inhabitants, because again, they're fighting for their lives, and shall resist any person, any common law citizen, any person or persons that shall by any lawful authority, so if there's a warrant out, anyone can catch them, be employed to apprehend and take the said Negro, that then in case of such resistance, it shall be lawful for such person or persons to kill the said Negro or slave so lying out and resisting, and that this law be once every 6 months published at the respective county court and parish churches within this colony. So I said this before, but I want you to visualize, for those of you that may have some affiliation or experience going to church and what that means to you. You're in church and you are praying, you've just sung a hymn, you've been told to go meet and greet with the fellow parishioners that are at the church. And then you go back to your seat. And the first announcement you hear is that we have this new law that basically says, in essence, you have the right to report Black people who don't have a certificate. They're going to be given 30 lashes on their bare back. And if for any given reason you see a warrant and it's noted that someone has run away, if you think that's the person or you happen to find that person and they resist you can actually kill them. And that you will be free and acquit. There's no moral or legal consequence at all whatsoever. And you're doing this for your protection, right? And so now we're gonna hear from the pastor or the minister, right? I want you all to internalize what this means and what this means on several levels. What does this mean about Christianity and how central that was and is to white identity during this period? What does it mean about white morality when you can go and murder someone and that's part of your morality, that's part of your identity? And it's also, what impact does it have on and what does it mean for the relationship that's developing between white European ethnics and what they're being told they have rights and privileges to do concerning Black people and their emotionality towards Black people? Because one has to either A, turn off their emotions completely to be able to participate in this type of terrorism and violent behavior, or they do it gleefully and willingly because there's total hatred and contempt that is developing for the people that they are doing it to. The other thing I want to note is that how many of you heard narratives, and you can just raise your hand in Zoom or raise your hand on screen, that, you know, there's this very general narrative that's espoused that white people did not see Black people as human. How many of you have ever heard that during this period? Okay, so we know that that's not true based on all of these laws that are outlawing marriage. Black people were testifying in court. There was total recognition that these people were human. And in that recognition that they were human, there was also a component that spoke to the contempt for their humanity. There was a vile rage and contempt and hostility towards African and Black people. And if you take the longer course with me, I'll explain this out in much deeper detail. This law, this is 1705. I'm just kind of showing you by the decade what's going on. And if any slave resists his master or owner or other person by his or her order correcting such slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, it shall not be accounted felony, but the master owner and every such other person so giving correction shall be free and acquit of all punishment and accusation for the same, as if such accident never happened. And also, if any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, notice what they're saying here, they start to specify. If any Negro, mulatto, or Indian, bond or free, shall at any time lift his or her hand in opposition against any Christian, not being Negro, mulatto, or Indian, he or she so offending shall for every such offense proved by the oath of the party receive on his or her bare back 30 lashes, well laid on, cognizable by a justice of the peace, for that county wherein such offense shall be committed. So I'm going to present just a few more quotes, and then I'm going to close with the video. And then we'll have a short Q&A. One of the things that Dr. Amos Wilson said, he says, there's no one more like the oppressor than that Black on Black criminal. The Black on Black criminal is a white man in blackface. And I'm in this quote, he's encompassing teachers, Black legal professionals, everyday common Black people, because our ideals, our definitions for upward mobility, the way that we speak, our expectations around presentation, how we relate, has all been shaped by white Eurocentricity and their dominance over us. And so we have conformed to all of this. So Dr. Wilson says he exhibits the same attitude towards his people as the white racist does. He doesn't love them, he hates them. He rejects them. He feels apart from them. He sees them merely as tools of exploitation. And when you look at the psychology of the Black on Black violent criminal, you will see that psychology exactly parallels to the white racist, because he has internalized the white racist lies, and now he has become an instrument for their activity against his own people. And this is true for Asians, this is true for Latinx people who are gatekeepers of whiteness and white supremacy and also anti-Blackness, and mistreat Black people every day implicitly, and just it comes up inherently. And they also benefit from the denigration and degradation of Black people. And Black people are also implicated in this also. Dr. Wilson says, and in acting the way he does, he thinks he's acting like a white man. So if the white man is free to kick the N's butt, he figures his freedom is the same thing. And he represents, if he sees the white man's freedom and capacity is to treat Black people any way he feels and to rise above the law, then he, in imitating the white man, is going to do the same thing the white man does. So anti-Blackness involves the criminalization, hyper-negativity, hyper-scrutiny, and negative positioning of Blackness, which has been embedded into the American cultural psychology, perpetrated through American institutions, all of them, legal, social, political, economic, and all others. One last example, the Negro Act of 1740. I go into this in my book as well, and this really amplifies the manifestation and implication of anti-Blackness. So this is an example of a law in South Carolina, which was also became something that was widespread throughout the colonies and later the states. Section 1 declares all Negroes and Indians to be slaves. Section 2, under this provision, it has been uniformly held that color is prima facie evidence that the party bearing the color of a Negro, mulatto, or mestizo is a slave, but the same prima facie result does not follow from the Indian color. So what this law is saying in essence, that color on site, prima facie means on site, on its face, that just upon the visual observation, one is enslaved if they have the color of a Negro, mulatto, mestizo, any combination of someone that's mixed with African blood. But if you bear the color of an Indian, which is closer in proximity to whiteness and some white ethnic Europeans, then you are exempted. So Black people have been targeted in ways in white America by white people and through white legality in ways that no other groups have. And if I had more time, I would go into deeper detail, but I'll close with this. One must behave, perform in ways that align with white Eurocentric patterns and ways of thinking, being, expressing, learning, etc. One's existence in white American culture must conform and align with the expectations of white culture. If one's existence does not conform to white Eurocentric patriarchal standards of living, being, existing, etc., then they will be stigmatized and marginalized in ways that will make it excruciatingly painful to survive, leading ultimately to their genocide. So if I can, Vita, can I close with a quick video? Okay, so this is an excerpt from a Black paper on white racism, which was featured on the Black Journal in 1971. And there are two people that I'm gonna share who are making comments on this that I actually also referred to in my book. One is Albert Clegg and the other is Dr. John Henrik Clark.
Now look, let's deal with our own historical naivete. Until we deal with it, we're not going any place. Black people have no right to expect anything from this establishment because it wasn't set up for them. They wasn't brought to this country to be given democracy. They was brought to this country to do some work, to labor and to obey. And once the machines made a whole lot of these jobs obsolete, it tended to make a whole lot of the people obsolete. Now, we keep worrying about the American promise and the American dream, and we forget it wasn't made to us. And the white man has not betrayed anything because he didn't promise us anything in the first place. Now, the role of institutions in a society is to reflect the power that controls that society. So we have American institutions arrayed against us, and we naively expect these institutions to reform themselves, because if they reform themselves, that's tantamount to presiding over their own demise.
I'd like to say one thing on that. I think the question you asked is how do the schools accomplish this? I mean, you were concerned about the process. I think we got to understand that there's no such thing as objective truth, which is implicit in everything Dr. Clark says. That white people use the institutions to accomplish white purpose. The white purpose is to maintain a power position and keep everybody else in a subordinate, powerless kind of position. Now that's the institution's purpose, and that's the way it functions and how it functions. And we got to realize then that everything that the schools teach is designed to fit into that purpose. The schools teach not objective truth, but what the white man wants to project as truth. Now that's from the very kindergarten right straight on through.
Well, for example, what?
Sociology. Sociology is not a science in the sense that it's dealing objectively with the way people live together. It's dealing with the white man's pattern of living together as the norm by which we judge how other people live. If you live like white people live, then you're living the way you are supposed to live. If not, you're either primitive or insane as a people. Psychologically, it's the same thing. Psychology does not deal with any objective kind of discussion or development of how people live or analysis of how people function as individuals, but how does the white man function? If the white man does it this way, then this is the norm by which we judge all other people.
And so, you know, we as Black people, really, when we talk about who's smart, who's educated, who's well presented, who's well spoken, who's gifted, who's talented, all of our evaluations are rooted in ways that we have been sanctioned and told that we have to show up and perform through a white Eurocentric model. So if, for example, and I see this many times with parents who have children, school-age children, and they're saying to their children, you need to do better in school. And because students may not perform well in certain subjects or in the model of the white educational system as it's set up currently, then there's automatically a presumption that something's wrong with the child, and there's something that the child's not doing to perform well. There's limited focus or no focus at all on the ways in which the educational system is, number one, biased and limited in what it provides in terms of a learning experience. There's no focus at all on the fact that that learning experience is directly related to the white capitalistic systems of industry and economics, and it only teaches you to perform within that context. And even the grading system, it substantiates knowledge as knowledge that the only knowledge that white people have deemed who sit in positions of power to decide what education is, what curriculum will be, what curriculum will be taught, that people will be graded based on this. And if you don't do well in this white educational system, then something's wrong with you. It doesn't acknowledge the innate talents and gifts that this child may have and validate all of the unique ways that individuals show up that may not fit within the white scientific model. It may not fit within the white linguistic model of English or social studies or whatever, right? And so I've seen many parents say to their children, something must be wrong with you, or the child gets in trouble, or they get a whipping, or they get put on punishment. And that further serves to perpetuate the white agenda of making young Black children, and particularly Black and brown children, either deficient or to feel deficient or insufficient and or inferior. And there's also no validation or attention given to the ways in which many educators who have come through that model are taught to teach to that model. They regulate according to that model. And they're not engaging and or necessarily available to relate to all children, because they're teaching in a way that's aligned with the white academic patterns of thinking, providing information, and so on and so forth. And so we continue to damage our children by relating their sense of self-worth to a system that is not meant to work for them predominantly. And for those of us like myself And some of you who are on here who have made it through these systems, I know for myself, it took hell for me to make it through these systems. I didn't like school until I got to my master's program, because then I was doing what I wanted to be doing. But so much of the stuff that I learned in primary education, 80%, 90% of it, I don't use. But that system is set up to weed people out who are not able to conform. And since it's created through and by the thought patterns of white people, white children will then inherently do well because they understand quicker than others, because it was built by them, made for them, and so on and so forth. And that's not to say that African children or non-white children won't perform well. It is to say that because we are also dealing with racism, racial trauma every day, that we have less emotional and mental capacity to process at the rates that other people do, because they're not dealing with those challenges. And if you, I would invite you to come and spend 2 days with me in the class that I teach, because you will understand further what I mean if you are to do that. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Vita. I'd love to, I know I went over a little bit, but if those you can stay on.
It's okay. It's fine. Okay. It's very intriguing and informative. In fact, I would be really interested in part 2 with you. But I know that we probably have some questions in the chat, Marco.
I'm looking here, and there are just a few comments that people have been saying.
Okay.
But as far as there was one question about when this event will be available again. It was recorded today, so this will be put on YouTube within the next week or so. We have a YouTube page, African American Museum and Library at Oakland, where we post our programs and things. So that will go on there.
Yes, and also be advised that Mr. King's presentation will live on not only with YouTube, but in the African American Museum and Library's archives. So it becomes history for all generations. When a lot of us are not here, it will live on. So I am just, wow. I took a lot of notes, Dante, a lot of notes. I felt like I was in a really serious class here, because what you discussed, we don't get to hear this, okay? This is something that we all need to know and have conversation and continue to have conversation. All right.
Yeah, and Vita, can I make just one more point?
Oh, sure, go right ahead.
So one of the reasons why I named my book, The 400-Year Holocaust, is because if you look at what's happening just with the examples that I shared with you, and a lot of the other examples that I go through in my book, such as how the white legal system sanctioned that rape against Black women was legal, that it was permissive, both throughout the 1800s into the 1900s. And they also substantiated or regulated that the races of Black men could be considered in determining their motive to rape white women. So Black men were automatically convicted of rape because the court wrote into legal doctrine that the race of Black men could be considered in terms of assessing their motive to rape women, okay? And that occurred in the 1900s. You see it in, or 1899, and you also see it in 1953. So I call it the legal, psychopathic, and sociopathic Black genocide because, Dr. Poussaint in 1971, and I'll just share a few quotes and then we can close. He says, I think we have to establish that racism is a mental illness. Many white social scientists would like to define racism as something that is normal, as a cultural variant. As long as we approach it that way, we really don't deal with the pathology of racism itself. It's like saying that cancer, because a lot of people have it in the society, is somehow normal. You also have got Randy Borum, who published this very extensive journal on psychopathy, if you will. And he says the transition into becoming a terrorist is rarely sudden and abrupt. What we know of actual terrorists suggests that there is rarely a conscious decision made to become a terrorist. Most involvement in terrorism results from gradual exposure and socialization towards extreme behavior. So what emerges and what happens when you erect laws, you raise laws that consistently say that you can kill these people, you can rape them, you can do anything you want to them? What happens to people in a community year after year who are given these rights and privileges? What happens to their psychology? And lastly, the last one I'll share is that by Dr. Bobby Wright, who authored The Psychopathic Racial Personality, and this was back in the mid-70s. He says, in their relationship with the Black race, whites are psychopaths, and their behavior represents an underlying biologically transmitted proclivity with roots deep in their evolutionary history. The psychopath is an individual who is constantly in conflict with other persons or groups. He is unable to experience guilt, is completely selfish and callous, and has a total regard for the rights of others. One of the best methods that can be used to measure the psychopathic traits of the white race is observing and analyzing their universal overt behaviors and attitudes towards Blacks. Psychopaths simply ignore the concept of right and wrong. By ignoring this trait in the white race, the lack of ethical and moral development, Blacks have made and are still making a tragic mistake in basing the worldwide Black liberation movement on moral suasion. It is pathological for Blacks to keep attempting to use moral suasion on a people who have no morality, where race is the variable. So if you study the history consistently from the past into the present and what's going on right now, you see that. And so anti-Blackness, deconstruction of it, white supremacy and white racism is intentional. It's been on purpose, and it functions to continue perpetually impairing the mental and emotional conditions and existences of Black people. So thank you, everyone.
That's totally, thank you, totally. Is
one.
there a sequel? Is there going to be a sequel to this?
We can definitely do a sequel. I have some time. I would love to plan something for June. If that's okay, that would just give me some time to breathe.
Yes.
We have one hand raised. Let's see here. Call in user number 2. If you can unmute.
Yes, I'm calling in from a landline, and I thank you for acknowledging my hand being raised. And I have thoroughly enjoyed, and I have the book, Mr. King, Dante King. I'd emailed you a bit ago, and in hearing you speak on something that's really important about. I think you said that you'd have a whole new segment on how beneficial it is for a person who identifies as in the LGBT community who's white. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to ask you. I'm going to go ahead and say, I wanted to ask you a question concerning that, because there is something that came up many years ago. I wouldn't say many, just within the last 5 years. Do you recall the same-sex couple who had adopted several Black kids, and once they were under scrutiny for abuse of those same Black kids, that they drove their vehicle off the Monterey Cliff and killed all the kids? Is that something I thought was sheltered in white privilege in the LGBT community? You see it that same way? Entirely.
The fact that they could do that, and because they're, again, under the cloak of anti-Blackness, with little regard for those little babies who were subjected to tragedy, in very terroristic tragedy. Those people, I think what's interesting is that you heard much less about that than you heard about Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And to your point, that speaks to the ways in which white people and their reputations, their families' reputations, get protected when they commit any type of crime, right? And I could, again, I won't go into detail, but I could show you several examples that come to mind for me right now that speak to what you're saying. And it speaks to an agency that is not available to any other person. And so in Cheryl Harris's framing from the paper that I shared with you in the beginning, Whiteness as Property, she says whiteness is the most valuable property that one can have in America. White skin, it's not about one's behavior or what they do or activities that go against cultural norms. It's about their demographics and what they do. Because I can show you several cases right now, and I refer to some of them in my book, where young white men within the last 5 to 6, 7 years committed the act of rape. In one situation, this person raped 4 young teenage girls, and the judge said he preyed on it and that prison was not the right decision for this white male, okay? And these men are being exonerated, and they're being acquitted and rendered the opportunity to go on and not only continue their life, but to live without any consequence for their behavior, which sends the message that they can get away with this behavior ongoing and there's no consequence for it. And so one was just in November of last year, right? And so there, you can get away with everything. I'm thinking of another example where this man, John Corcoran, I also quote this in my book, he says, I was a teacher for 17 years and I didn't know how to read or write. And in the article, he's talking about how he made it through primary education, he made it through college. All of his teachers knew that he couldn't read or write, but they encouraged him and they saw his potential. That type of agency, if you will, is not available for anyone that doesn't have white skin. How many of you can point me to a Black child who was able to go not only through primary education, but through college, a teaching credential program, and become a professional educator, and they didn't know how to read or write? How many of you can point me to that person? That's not. Mm-hmm.
Am I still able to ask to finish up what I was? That was excellent. Yeah. I wanted to say also that was the Hart family, the women who drove their vehicle off the cliff and killed several kids. That in an article that was written by another African American woman who was courageous enough to explore the skin privilege that you talk about, that when it came time to actually make that decision and they drove off the cliff, their cell phone revealed that they took the time to look for a dog shelter, no-kill dog shelter, but they killed the kids. They actually have a record of them searching out what to do with the dogs, but they had made the decision to kill the kids. So I do think there's a lot of dehumanization of African Americans. And thank you very much.
Absolutely. And so to that point that you just made, to the point of a white doctor that I recently had in one of my courses who told me that he was part of the eugenics movement and he went around to locate 16-year-old Black virgins to give them hysterectomies back in the 70s. What about this attitude and or conditioning is not psychopathic or sociopathic, which is why I appreciate the framework from people like Dr. Bobby Wright, from people like Dr. Alan Poussaint, because we've been living this, and some of us have been saying individually and personally, this is crazy, this shouldn't be happening. But to have actual legitimate frameworks to refer to characterize what we go through every day, The fact that these, and I was going to show you all an example, I didn't get to it, but the fact that you had 4 12-year-old girls who were accused of being too loud and too giddy, if you will, who were then strip searched by the school faculty and principal. They went in their bra and panties. The fact that you could have that in 2019, the fact that you just had last week or 2 weeks ago in San Francisco, this Black 13-year-old who was being picked up by his tutor, and the police came and aggressively accosted him. The fact that you had a Black couple who, by income standards, debt to income, loan to value ratio standards, qualified for refinance on their home and for their home to be appraised. And when they stood in to get their home appraised for $500,000 less than what it appraised for when they got their white neighbor to stand in for them. So there's a psychology behind all of this that speaks to the ways in which people have been socialized. And like Randy Borum said, it's been a gradual process. And so even we as Black people can be implicated as tools and gatekeepers of white supremacy. We can perpetuate it just as much as any white person can, because our goals in terms of where we're trying to get in our lives is modeled at what after white people have said we should have and what we should be striving for. And that's everything from our education to our economic standing to the way that we speak, present information, the way that we dress, all of it. The African-American identity in particular is rooted or has derived from out of white Eurocentricity. There's nothing about us that is natural or of our own creation when we have had all of our existence regulated by an entirely other group. And Malcolm X said that the best. He says, when you are in your own country, on your own land, under your own court system, under your own government and school system, you're in a position to get justice. But when you are dominated by another group in another country, in another man's land, under another man's court system, under another man's educational system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it.
Thank you, Dante. Wow. We're taking it all in. We definitely have to take it all in. And this has been very, it was very informative, but it was a little emotional for me. I felt myself going through different emotions as you spoke and read. I believe that, Dante, I'm sure everybody on this call has learned something today that they did not know before. And for AAMLO to bring you here is indeed been an honor. We do meet the author. I've been doing Meet the Author series here at AAMLO for over a decade. And there are certain authors that really stand out for me. And definitely you are on the top of the list. And I do wish that sometime in the very near future, we can bring you back and we can do a part 2. Wow. I know your book, you have a lot of your book goes into many different directions. And it's amazing to me how you stay focused. But your presentation today was excellent. And like I said, I took a lot of notes. Even in your book, you're talking about human sex trafficking. You touch upon these crucial subjects that sometimes we refuse to talk about, not because we don't want to, maybe we feel ashamed, or maybe we just become within ourselves. Instead of being an extrovert, we are introvert, and we're thinking all these things, but we don't allow ourselves to express how we really feel. Yeah. So I thank you for today. I thank you, everyone on this call. If there's anyone that has any last questions or comments for Mr. Dante King, and I know you gave a lot of thanks to your mother. I want to take this time and thank your mother too, because of your mother, you are here sharing your expertise with us. And once again, thank you everyone for spending your Saturday with AAMLO. And remember, talk about Mr. King's book, buy his book, and talk about how you enjoy spending the afternoon with the A team. That's the AAMLO team. I got my librarian here, my library assistant here, okay? My library aide here. Danielle Woods, the librarian, shout out to her. Marco Frazier, library assistant. I got Mario over here, library aide. Yeah. So we are just asking everybody, thank you for tuning in. And remember, if you're not a part of our newsletter, be a part, subscribe to the newsletter. You'll see, and right today, that'll make you know that, okay, I better get to the newsletter to find out when Mr. King is coming back to AAMLO. So that's another incentive to be part of the newsletter. Also, remember, support this institution, be a member of the Friends and Stewards of the African American Museum and Library. Go to their website. If you can't get to your website, you got a problem with the computer, come in and see me. I'll hook you up right here. So have a great, safe day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Vita.
Bye, you guys. Bye, Dante.
Bye-bye. Bye, Dante. Proud of you.
Be safe out there. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye, Sabrina. Bye, Tiffany.
Dante.
Bye, Margaret. It's great to see y'all. I love you.
Good to see you too. I'll be at the library.
Bye, Dante.
I'll be at the
library.
I love you too.
I'm looking for everybody.
You're awesome, Dante.